The letter was hidden between psalms and grief. I was 63, and widowhood had already taught me the sound of quiet rooms. The house carried the scent of cedar and old flowers as I straightened the bookshelf where his Bible waited. Dust shimmered through the slanted morning light, the kind that makes you remember instead of breathe. I opened the Bible to slip in a pressed lily from last Sunday's memorial, and a folded page slid free. It was his handwriting. The loops, the ink pressure, I would know it even in the dark. The date struck me first, the same week he died. My throat went dry. "Forgive what I could not say aloud," it read. Forgive what? The ache of loss tilted toward something sharper, an old door creaking open in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table where sunlight pooled like honey, staring at the letter. The paper carried his scent, faint cologne mixed with time. My fingers trembled. I whispered his name as if the sound could summon reason. "David, what did you keep from me?" The clock ticked, patient and cruel. I remembered the week before his death, his late nights, the way he'd locked the study. Back then I thought grief would be the last secret between us. Now I wasn't sure grief had even begun. A vow pulsed inside me like a heartbeat. I will know everything. The warmth of memory tried to soothe me. I brewed tea, poured it into his favorite chipped mug, and let the steam blur the letter's edges. The house still carried our rituals, the humming refrigerator, the creak of the hallway, the photograph above the mantel where he smiled just slightly too carefully. My home had always been a shrine, now it felt like evidence. I walked to his old study. The air smelled of paper and dust. Files sat in neat stacks. He'd always been organized, methodical. I found sermon notes, community letters, donation lists, but no explanation, no reference, no closure. Then a faint sound, the old landline ringing, sharp and sudden. My heart jolted. The voice on the other end was soft, deliberate. "Mrs. Avery, this is Helen from St. Mark's. You called about a burial record?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I have something unusual here," she murmured. "A note in the file. It's written in the same hand as your husband's records. Do you wish to come by?" I hesitated. "Was it added recently?" A pause. "The ink hasn't aged like the rest." After the call ended, I stood still, the letter clutched in my palm. The house exhaled around me, its silence too complete. I could hear only the slow hum of the refrigerator and the beating of my pulse. If he'd written this the week he died, then his last sermon, his final words, might have been something else entirely. I remembered him at the pulpit, speaking of forgiveness as if it were currency. Perhaps he'd been buying peace. I placed the folded page back inside the Bible, between Psalms and Revelation, and pressed the cover closed. The scent of old ink lingered, a mix of devotion and deceit. By afternoon, I had called Helen again. "I'll come tomorrow," I said. She hesitated before replying. "Bring the letter, you might need it." I looked toward the photograph above the mantel. His smile felt suddenly deliberate, like an actor caught mid-line. The air turned heavy, the light duller. I realized I'd spent 5 years guarding a memory that was never mine to keep. His sin was signed with my name. They told me love buries truth deeper than graves. The words clung to me as I pushed open the heavy oak door of the parish office. The air inside was thick with incense and old paper, the kind that smells like forgotten prayers. Somewhere behind the counter, a printer hummed, a low, rhythmic sound that reminded me of a heartbeat under strain. Helen looked up from her desk. She was kind, deliberate, the sort of woman who never misplaced a file or a secret. "You called earlier," she said softly. "About the death record?" "Yes," I replied. My voice sounded strange in that quiet place, thin and deliberate. She nodded and typed something. The printer's hum grew louder. A sheet of paper emerged. White, official, final. She slid it across the desk toward me. I stared. The name was right. The date, too. But the address, wrong. A small apartment in another part of town, one I had never stepped foot in. "That can't be correct," I murmured. "He lived with me. Until the end." Helen's eyes flickered. "The record was updated after the funeral. Someone sent an amendment notice." "Who?" She hesitated. "No name, just an envelope." The candles near the altar wavered as if breathing. Behind the glass door, parishioners whispered, soft, uncertain tones. My heart pounded louder than their prayers. "I need to see that envelope," I said. "I'm not sure that's possible," she whispered. "It was sealed by Father Raymond. He keeps it locked in the archive." "Then unlock it," I said. "Please." Her lips tightened. "I can't. Not without a written request." The echo of the printer still lingered, looping in my head. I signed the form for access and slid it back to her, my handwriting trembling like the first line of confession. She folded the paper carefully. "You'll hear back within 3 business days." 3 days? I whispered. "He's been gone 5 years. I can wait 3 more." Outside, the church bells rang, 3 slow chimes that felt too heavy for morning. The scent of wax and old hymns followed me down the steps. That night, I sat in the kitchen with his Bible open again, the folded letter pressed under my palm. I played his final sermon through an old recording file labeled Reference ID 7A93. His voice filled the room, calm, confident, deliberate. But I heard something else. Now, hesitation between words, pauses that felt rehearsed. "Love endures all things," he'd said, "even silence." I stopped the recording and stared at the clock. Midnight. The hum of the refrigerator matched the rhythm of that printer. Every sound felt like a reminder that I had missed something deliberate. The stakes had changed. This wasn't about grief anymore. It was about truth, how far it could be buried, and what it might cost to dig it up. The next morning, I called Helen again. "Tell Father Raymond I'll be at the parish tomorrow. I want to see the archive myself." "Margaret," she said gently, "are you sure you want to open this?" "I buried a husband," I said. "Not the truth." A silence stretched between us, thick and uneasy. Finally she whispered, "Then come early, before service. I'll leave the side door unlocked." The call ended. I stood by the window, watching the dawn settle like ash across the graveyard. Every stone looked the same from a distance, names fading, dates uncertain. But one truth had already surfaced, trembling beneath the weight of devotion and deceit. The envelope wasn't meant for the church. His winter coat still carried a secret weight. I hadn't touched it since the day of the funeral. It hung by the door like a shadow, its fabric still holding the faint scent of smoke and rain. I reached into the pocket, half expecting dust, but my fingers brushed metal. A brass key, small yet heavy enough to pull me backward into questions. Wrapped around it was a card from Meridian Bank, the edges worn soft with time. I set it on the table. The metal's chill grounded me, sharper than grief. For a moment, I thought it was nothing, an old key, maybe to his desk drawer. But the serial, etched faintly into the side, told a different story. Numbers I didn't recognize, but they felt deliberate, like coordinates to a secret. I called Ruth. She was more than a lawyer. She'd been my protector since David's passing. When the world grew bureaucratic and cruel, Ruth translated it back into human language. She arrived within an hour, hair damp from the drizzle. "You sound shaken," she said. "I found this." I pushed the key toward her. She studied it, tracing the ridges with her thumb. "Meridian. That's a safety deposit marker. I can run it quietly." The sound of her phone keyboard filled the room. Soft, staccato, tense. After a minute, her brows tightened. "Margaret, this box is registered under 2 names, yours and another." "Another?" "Yes. The record shows active until 5 years ago, then dormant." My heart thudded once, hard. "Can you open it?" "With your authorization, yes." By noon, we stood inside the sterile chill of the bank. The walls gleamed with quiet power, and the receptionist's smile didn't reach her eyes. Ruth presented the authorization slip. A man in a gray suit guided us to a private booth. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic sigh. Inside lay a stack of paper, thin, precise, official. 2 withdrawal slips, both signed in his unmistakable hand. The totals were clear: $9,300 on one, $9,300 on the other. The same date range he'd been preparing his final sermon. I stared at his signature, steady and clean. Why 2 identical amounts? Ruth glanced through the statements. Someone didn't want to trigger a reporting threshold. It's careful work. Too careful. He wasn't like this, I whispered. He was methodical, Ruth finished for me. Sometimes method hides motive. I leaned back against the cold wall, feeling the chill through my coat. The texture of the metal key pressed against my palm, as if reminding me I wasn't done yet. The stakes sharpened. Whatever he'd been hiding, it wasn't only money. It was intent. Ruth spoke gently. We can file a request to release the associated data trail, but it will bring attention. I want it, I said. She hesitated. Are you sure? Once it's official, it won't stay private. I looked at the key again, the way it caught the fluorescent light. He already made it public by dying without telling me. Ruth nodded, sliding a form across the table. Then sign here. The pen scratched my name into the document, my first boundary line drawn not out of grief, but out of will. As we left, rain fell harder. The sky hung low and pewter gray, pressing down on the street. Ruth folded her umbrella, watching me closely. You might not like what you find. I already don't, I said. Back home, I placed the key on the mantel beside the Bible. Its dull shine mirrored my own reflection, blurred, unfinished. I replayed the memory of his funeral, how the pastor had spoken of transparency and virtue, words that now felt like riddles carved in stone. I whispered into the still air, if you were protecting someone, who was it? No answer came, only the creak of the house settling into silence. By midnight, I had already filed the data access request online, attaching the scanned deed labeled Financial Record Reference M11C. The confirmation ping sounded hollow in the dark. When I finally closed my laptop, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when denial dies. The key glinted faintly under the kitchen light. The account's second name wasn't mine. The name beside his was Emma Ross. I read it twice, then again, hoping the letters would shift, that the paper might correct itself. But they didn't. Her name was there, inked neatly on the legal affidavit, sharing the same line where mine once stood alone. The lamp on Ruth's desk flickered, a pulse of light that felt cruelly alive. She watched me carefully. You need to breathe, she said. I did, shallowly. Who is she? Ruth turned the page, voice even. There's an address, a small apartment on East Willow Street, registered 3 months before his death. I stared at the signature, his. The curve of his letters had always been gentle, almost shy. But next to hers, it looked deliberate, final. I don't recognize it, I whispered. You wouldn't, Ruth said. It was listed under a private designation, an alternate beneficiary clause. The light trembled again, stretching our shadows across the table. I reached out, tracing the faint emboss of the notary seal, my fingers grazing the raised ink. The warmth from the bulb made it soft to touch, as if the truth itself were melting. He was careful, Ruth murmured. Too careful. I shook my head. He didn't have secrets. Everyone does, she said, even the kind ones. Silence expanded between us, heavy and holy. The stakes had changed. This wasn't about widowhood anymore. It was about proof, what it meant, what it demanded. Should I call her? I asked. Ruth's lips parted, but no answer came. Only the soft hum of the desk lamp filled the space. I did call her. The number on the affidavit rang once, twice, then cut to a hollow beep. I tried again, same result. I sent a message. It went unread. By evening, I lit a candle on the kitchen counter, a habit left over from his birthdays, his vigils, the nights when missing him was unbearable. The flame danced against the glass, casting small ghosts on the wall. I whispered into the room, "Who are you, Emma Ross?" No one replied, but I could almost hear Ruth's earlier warning echo through the quiet. Truth burns the finder first. Later that night, I drafted a formal letter, one that couldn't be ignored, a notarized declaration of access. "To whom it may concern," it began, though I knew exactly who it concerned. I demanded full disclosure of any estate irregularities, citing legal precedent and beneficiary rights. My hand didn't tremble this time. I had crossed from mourning into confrontation. The next morning, I hand-delivered the envelope to the courier. The clerk asked, "Recipient?" "Emma Ross," I said. The name tasted metallic, unfamiliar. As the package slid away behind the counter, a part of me wanted to chase it, to take it back, to keep ignorance as protection. But I couldn't. The line had already been drawn, ink to paper, grief to defiance. That night, I sat by the window, the candle now a stub. Light bled across the floorboards, soft and uneven. I caught my reflection in the glass, and for the first time, I didn't look like someone left behind. I looked like someone demanding to be seen. The phone lay silent beside me. I told myself I didn't care, that whatever she had to say wouldn't change what he'd done. But lies have a way of waiting, of breathing just beneath the stillness. At midnight, the silence broke. The phone vibrated once, then again. Unknown number. I hesitated, the candle flickering out. Emma finally called back. Her voice sounded too familiar to be new. It came through the answering machine just after dusk, that hour when the sky loses its color and the house begins to echo. I hadn't heard that voice before, but something in its rhythm, its hush, its small pauses, made me feel as though I had. "Margaret," she said softly, "I hope this doesn't frighten you. I just thought, you should know he wasn't alone in those last days. I was helping him. Only helping." I stood frozen, the phone still in my hand. Her tone carried a tenderness that felt borrowed, as if she'd picked it up from the way he once spoke to me. My thumb pressed the replay button. The tape whirred, her words breathing through static. "I never wanted to come between you," she went on. "He was worried. He said someone close might ruin everything he built. He wanted peace." The room temperature dropped, that unmistakable shift when memory walks in uninvited. I could almost smell the evening he died. The rain, the damp coat, the way the air had clung to his last sermon notes. I turned off the lamp. The house darkened, and her voice filled it like smoke. I played it again and again. Ruth called right then. "You sound strange," she said. "I got a message." "From her?" "Yes. She said she was helping him." "Helping him hide?" Ruth's question landed heavy. "I don't know," I whispered, "but she knew too much." Ruth sighed. "Then stop calling it help. It's intrusion." The silence that followed carried weight. I knew Ruth was trying to protect me, but protection had begun to feel like a slower kind of grief. After hanging up, I went to his study, the same one I'd kept locked since the funeral. Dust had settled thick on the desk, the kind that softens guilt into history. I opened the drawer and pulled out the estate file, the same one the notary had returned. Inside were institutional forms, authorizations, proxies, transfer slips. Every one bore his signature. Each line said he trusted the system more than he trusted me. That ended tonight. I sat down and drafted a consent withdrawal notice. The words came steady. "I revoke all prior permissions granted to external custodians over the estate of David Avery, effective immediately." Ruth would have called it rash. Maybe it was, but I needed the silence broken. I needed something irreversible. When the email sent confirmation, record reference L42A approved, I stared at the screen until it dimmed. The heat from the old monitor warmed my face, but the rest of the room stayed cold. I caught my reflection in the dark window. My hair was unbrushed, my eyes too sharp. The woman looking back wasn't mourning anymore. She was dissecting. Only helping. I muttered, echoing Emma's words. Helping who? My pulse beat in my wrist, strong enough to hurt. I opened the voicemail one last time, pressing the phone to my ear like it might confess. Her voice wavered mid-sentence, as if someone had been in the room with her. "Tell me what you want me to do," she'd said. To him, not to me. Then a faint exhale, then silence. It was proof, though I didn't yet know of what. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, rattling the latch. I closed the blinds and sat still until the air warmed again. Ruth texted an hour later, "Please don't send that notice tonight. Sleep first." But I'd already sent it. My reflection in the dark glass didn't flinch. I looked older, harder, alive in a way grief had never allowed. Then, as if the universe wasn't done twisting the knife, the phone lit up again. Same unknown number. No voicemail this time, just a missed call, and beneath it, the same voice transcribed by the system's text preview. "I'm not finished, Margaret." She wasn't done protecting him. The pastor said he kept no secrets. His drawer disagreed. His office smelled of wax and something older. Ink, dust, and the faint sweetness of decay that clings to pages handled too many times by too many trembling hands. Candles flickered beneath the window, their light warping the crosses on the wall into crooked silhouettes. He smiled when I arrived, that gentle, pastoral kind of smile meant to bless and deflect at once. "I heard you've been asking questions," he said. "I'm just trying to understand a few inconsistencies," I replied. He hesitated, then opened a drawer that stuck halfway before yielding with a sigh. From it, he pulled a thick, worn ledger bound in cracked leather. "Everything we do here is transparent," he said softly, "but you'll need to see for yourself." The scent of old paper hit me first. Dry, sharp, the kind that makes breathing feel like trespassing. I turned the first few pages. Baptisms, weddings, donations. Every name carried the weight of ceremony, until I reached his, my husband's name. There it was again, over and over. Dates that didn't belong to a dead man. 3 years of entries following his supposed burial. Each quarter, $4,500. Neat arithmetic. Total $18,000. His handwriting, meticulous, slanted right, unchanged. "He made these donations personally?" I asked, voice breaking halfway through the question. The pastor's eyes darted toward the window, then to the door. "Those were processed by our accountant," he said. "I can't speak for unusual circumstances." I glanced at the page again. My fingers traced the ink as if the texture might lie. "You told me he was gone," I whispered. "I believed he was," the pastor replied. "We all did." A knock interrupted us. The church accountant stepped in, a frail man with an anxious shuffle. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and glanced between us. "Margaret's here about the ledgers," the pastor said, tone tight. The accountant nodded, already knowing too much. "You shouldn't have to find this like that," he murmured. "But yes, those entries, they're wrong. The filings were doctored." "By who?" He looked at the pastor. "The diocese audit was supposed to clear it, but they buried it. Paperwork labeled as posthumous settlement. It was never meant to be revisited." A tremor rippled through me, anger dressed as understanding. I could almost hear Ruth's voice in my mind. Institutional silence isn't ignorance, it's defense. I straightened the pages, memorizing the reference marking printed faintly at the bottom. Financial Record ID E72K, my proof. "I'll need a copy of this," I said. The pastor's tone softened to warning. "Be careful, Margaret. This isn't about faith anymore. It's about control." "I've lost enough to both." For a moment he looked genuinely sorry. Then the mask of clerical calm returned. "I can give you 5 minutes before I have to lock it away." I took them. My hands shook as I snapped a few photographs with my phone. The ledger creaked under its own history, its scent lingering like guilt. I found myself whispering a vow under my breath. No more secrets. When I left, the afternoon sun cut through the stained glass, casting fractured color over my coat. Red, gold, violet, the shades of both sin and confession. Outside, I called the local registrar's office, reading the reference ID aloud to file a report. "This is a case of falsified death documentation," I said clearly. The clerk on the line went quiet, then answered, "Understood, ma'am. We'll escalate to municipal review." That was it. The boundary crossed. The pastor came to the doorway as I ended the call. "You've set things in motion you can't undo," he said gently. "Then let them move." He sighed, looking past me at the courtyard where the wind toyed with prayer flags. Faith survives because it forgets. Justice doesn't. I turned away. The scent of candle wax followed me down the steps, mingling with the cold air. My pulse thudded steady, not from fear, but from clarity. That night, I placed the photos in a folder labeled Evidence, E72K Ledger Entries. Ruth would call it courage. I called it inevitability. But when I returned to the church the next morning to collect the certified copies, the drawer gaped empty. The ledger vanished overnight. Someone cleaned God's drawer before dawn. When I returned to the church, the air felt wrong, emptied, scrubbed, like a confession that had been rehearsed too long. The pastor's office was open, sunlight spilling across the bare desk. The ledger was gone, not misplaced, erased. Even the faint outline where it had rested had been wiped clean. By noon, the whispers began. The local paper printed a headline, "Widow Fabricates Ledger Scandal." They quoted anonymous clergy sources and hinted at my emotional instability. The story traveled fast, through pews, coffee counters, and inboxes. I sat at my kitchen table, the newspaper spread flat like an accusation. The headline blurred until all I saw was his name, my husband's, caught between quotation marks, framed by disbelief. I pressed play on the small digital recorder that I'd used during my meeting. The device clicked, sharp and cold. The sound filled the silence. "Everything we do here is transparent," the pastor's voice echoed faintly. Then the drawer creaked open, paper rustled, proof that had existed once. Ruth called before I could replay it. "They've turned this public," she said. "The diocese has issued a statement." I saw. "They're calling it a misunderstanding." "Then I'll correct them." She paused, voice low. "Margaret, the system protects itself. You're stepping into its circle." "Then I'll draw my own." I forwarded the recordings and email snapshots to the local news desk. Subject line, "Formal response to defamatory statement." Attached was my certified filing with the police, reference ID C47M, detailing falsified financial documentation and missing property. My proof had become digital now, harder to burn. Within hours, the story twisted again. The church's social page posted a photo of me leaving their grounds, a still frame taken from a security camera. The caption read, "Private citizen removed unauthorized documents." The irony stung, truth labeled as theft. That night, the sound of my neighbor's radio bled through the thin walls. The same reporter's voice, steady and clipped. "Authorities are investigating claims made by a local widow regarding forged church finances. Parish officials deny wrongdoing." The click of his recorder became a rhythm in my head. Click, pause, click, the sound of a clock that refused to let me forget. I opened my email again. Beneath the forwarded evidence, I wrote, "You published me without asking for comment. You'll publish this too." I hit send. The small whoosh of the outbox felt like defiance. Ruth texted moments later, "They'll circle the wagons. Don't let them gaslight you." Too late for that. The gaslight had already become daylight. I was visible now, and that was its own kind of danger. At 10:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. An unknown number, a man's voice, clipped and polite. "Mrs. Avery? This is Detective Coleman from the Financial Crimes Unit. We've received multiple filings involving your name. You'll need to provide the original evidence for verification." I stared at the empty folder on my desk. "It's gone," I said quietly. "Then you'll need to come in." The call ended with a tone too clean to argue with. I sat still, the night stretching long. Outside, wind brushed against the glass, faint but deliberate. I thought of the ledger, the pages, the ink, the scent of candle wax. It had vanished, but the numbers it carried had already multiplied into suspicion. Proof doesn't die when stolen. It reincarnates in doubt. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the faint reflection of the kitchen light across the window pane. My boundary had grown teeth, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to let it bite. The next morning, a courier knocked. He handed me a large envelope stamped with the seal of the county court. I tore it open, expecting silence, expecting stalling. Instead, I found a warrant. It was addressed to me. They searched my house before searching his grave. The knock wasn't loud. It was measured, official, the kind that announces itself as both authority and warning. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood framed by the morning light, badges glinting, their eyes politely detached. One held a paper folded 3 times, the seal still damp from the courthouse. "Mrs. Avery," the taller one said, "we have a warrant." I stepped aside. "For what?" "Search and seizure of materials relevant to the financial investigation." His gloved hand brushed against the wallpaper as he entered, fingertips trailing over the faded floral print I'd chosen 20 years ago. That small motion, the gloved hand, the gentle drag of latex on paint, felt like power disguised as procedure, the texture of control. They opened drawers, lifted frames, and moved with quiet efficiency through rooms that had never felt so small. The sound of latex against wood, paper against paper. It was the sound of intrusion, dressed as order. The detective, Coleman, stood near the doorway, warrant in hand. His eyes softened for a fraction. "You've been very cooperative so far," he said, "but this is protocol." "Protocol for whom?" I asked. "For both sides," he answered, but the apology in his tone didn't match the firmness in his stance. They reached the living room. One officer lifted the old Bible, the same one that had hidden the letter that started all this, and placed it into an evidence bag. Another took the folded note, the photographs, and the church receipts. Everything sacred, sealed in plastic. Ruth called mid-search. I silenced the phone. There was nothing to say yet that wouldn't sound like surrender. When Coleman finished reading the list aloud, his voice caught slightly. "Also, any documents bearing the deceased's name or connected financial proofs." "The deceased," I repeated. "You mean my husband?" He hesitated. "That's what we're verifying." The word landed wrong. Verifying. As though death were a variable, something that could be audited. The fluorescent light above the kitchen flickered, cold, unflattering. The house smelled faintly of cleaning detergent, and something metallic, the residue of early intrusion. I leaned against the counter, fingers tracing the smooth ceramic edge. "Do you think I forged his death?" I asked quietly. Coleman looked away. "It's not my place to think, Mrs. Avery, only to follow the file." "And what does the file say?" He folded the paper carefully, aligning its edges. "It says there are discrepancies, withdrawals, transfers, active accounts." My throat tightened. "Active?" He nodded once. "Accounts can only remain active if someone authorizes them. Or if someone's pretending they can." He didn't respond. The silence between us stretched, humming with unspoken pity. In the corner, one officer examined the doorframe, brushing dust away, as if secrets might cling there. Another photographed the shelf where I kept the urn. No one touched it, but their presence alone made the air around it feel violated. "Was this necessary?" I asked. Coleman finally met my eyes. "You filed multiple institutional claims, Mrs. Avery. You turned private allegations into public record. Once that happens, the system defends itself." The words settled like sediment, slow, irrevocable. I'd wanted justice. What I'd summoned was surveillance. When they finished, the evidence bag sat on my dining table like ghosts of my own making. Coleman signed the chain of custody log, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said softly, I don't think you're lying. That's not comfort, I said. That's observation. He nodded, folding the warrant and slipping it into his coat. You'll get a receipt for all items removed. The house exhaled when they left, doors closing in polite succession. I sank into the nearest chair, staring at the faint outline where the Bible had rested for years. The absence screamed louder than accusation. My consent withdrawal, filed weeks ago, had been my line of defense. Now they were testing its reach, probing its legal edge. I'd turned my grief into evidence, and evidence had turned against me. The phone vibrated again. Ruth's message glowed. Emma's name just resurfaced on the registry. Alive. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred into its light. My pulse drummed in my ears, fast, insistent. I reached for the warrant on the table, flipping to the last page, reading the printed summary line. Issued under authorization. Subject: David Avery. The warrant listed him as alive. Dead men shouldn't sign new forms. That was my first thought when the clerk handed me the document. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and recycled air, something dry, bureaucratic, and tired. Yet the ink before me looked alive, fresh, deliberate. The signature, his signature, curled with the same precision I'd watched him use 100 times before. Where did this come from? I asked. The clerk adjusted his glasses. Routine archive request. It surfaced in the legal database during cross-verification. I stared at the heading. Marriage Amendment. Filed 2 years post-decease. My pulse stumbled. The line beneath read, Signature, David Avery. Ruth was beside me, calm as always, though I could see her knuckles pale around the file she held. We'll need a certified copy, she said. The clerk hesitated. This one's already certified. The fluorescent lights above hummed low, their flicker catching the ink like a nervous heartbeat. Light shimmered off every loop of his name, every stroke that proved the impossible. He's dead, I said. I buried him. Ruth placed a hand on my arm. And yet, the state disagrees. We took the file into a small conference room, the kind meant for whispered confessions and procedural disasters. She laid out the documents like crime scene evidence, page after page of notarized statements, witness initials, and official stamps. This isn't a copy-paste forgery, she said quietly. The ink density's consistent. The pressure marks are genuine. You mean it's real? I mean someone made it look real enough to pass federal scrutiny. I pressed my palm against the page. The paper felt cool, thick, the texture of deceit masquerading as truth. My skin prickled where his name met mine. Ruth exhaled slowly. We'll need a forensic handwriting analyst. Already have one, I said. He examined the ledger entries. When the results came, they confirmed what the air in that courthouse already knew. The signature was authentic. Pen pressure, letter flow, curvature, an exact match to verified samples. Could it be mechanical replication? I asked. Possibly, Ruth said, but the stroke variation shows human control. Then someone's alive, or pretending for him. The words lodged in me like splinters. Every silence I'd tolerated, every half-truth I'd forgiven, all of it rewrote itself in that single realization. The grave wasn't a resting place. It was a hiding place. Ruth stood, gathering her notes. We're filing for judicial review. Fraudulent documentation under Section 38. I nodded, though my throat refused to open. That evening, I drove past the church where it all began. The windows glowed faintly from inside, light leaking through stained glass in fractured colors. I parked across the street, watching silhouettes move within, one tall, one small, both blurred by distance. Inside the car, I opened my notebook and wrote one line beneath the date. If truth won't walk into light, I'll drag it there. The next morning, Ruth met me at the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand. You understand what this means? She asked. I understand I'm done being quiet. We filed under fraudulent documentation, attaching the analyst's report as evidence reference ID A93F. The clerk stamped it twice, ink bleeding into the fibers. Official now, irreversible. During the hearing request, the opposing counsel appeared, a thin man in a dark suit who never looked directly at me. "This will be dismissed," he murmured to Ruth in the corridor. "You can't accuse a ghost." "Then let the court decide if he's one," she replied. I watched his eyes flicker, the briefest sign of uncertainty. That was all I needed. By afternoon, the hearing was confirmed. Date, 3 weeks ahead. Time, 10:00 a.m. The courtroom listed under jurisdictional ID 472B. Ruth folded the notice carefully. "They'll have to respond," she said. "To what?" "To the summons." My heart pounded once, deep and deliberate. "And who's being summoned?" She looked at me, the answer already trembling between us. "The judge ordered him to appear." He stood at the end of the corridor breathing. The fluorescent lights above hummed in a sterile rhythm, washing everything in a pallid glow. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, the kind of scent that makes truth feel clinical. My steps slowed as the distance between us shrank, and time, once loyal, turned treacherous. He was thinner, older, but alive. My lungs forgot how to move. I watched him blink, watched the faint tremor in his left hand, a quiver he tried to still by pressing it to his side. That gesture had always betrayed him, even in the smallest lies. The doctor's voice cracked the silence. He came under a false name. The words ricocheted down the corridor. False name, false death, false everything. For a moment, I thought the air itself froze. Then came the heat, an unbearable rush beneath my skin, burning through years of grief that had turned to duty, then to evidence, then to vengeance disguised as faith. He looked at me without recognition, or so he claimed. "Do I know you?" A practiced tremor, an actor's pause. "Yes," I said quietly. "You know me better than anyone you ever pretended to love." His brow furrowed. "I don't remember." "You remember enough to lie about remembering." The nurse standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. Her badge caught the overhead light, the name printed in crisp ink. Simple, clean, uncorrupted. She would become my silent witness, whether she meant to or not. He reached for the edge of the doorframe as though steadying himself. "They said I was found near the river," he murmured. "No ID, no past." "Convenient." The doctor interjected softly. "He's been here 3 weeks. Mild head trauma, disorientation. We ran prints to confirm identity. The match triggered an alert." "An alert?" "Yes. Legally deceased, 6 years." 6 years. 2 numbers that had carved themselves into every file, every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer. I took a slow step closer. "You signed documents, didn't you?" I asked him. "Marriage amendments, financial withdrawals, a second life paid for in my name." He flinched, not at the words, but at the truth behind them. "I don't what? Recall the moment you chose survival over decency?" My voice startled even me. The corridor seemed to tighten around us. Somewhere behind, a machine beeped, a steady, clinical rhythm counting out my restraint. "I lost everything," he whispered. "You didn't lose. You hid." His hand trembled again, faintly, rhythmically, like a lie unraveling itself. The nurse stepped forward. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" "No," I said gently. "He should hear this." The doctor glanced between us, torn between professionalism and human discomfort. "He's under observation," he said. "You can speak later, once. I've been speaking to his shadow for 6 years. I think I've earned a sentence or 2 with the real man." My words settled like frost. Even the humming lights seemed to dim. He looked up at me, eyes wide, not with guilt, but with calculation. "You filed a report," he said slowly, as if remembering lines from an old confession. "You turned them against me." "They didn't need my help," I said. "You did that all by yourself." He inhaled sharply, his breath uneven. "I never meant to hurt you. You hurt me on paper, in ledgers, in silence, in graves you never filled." He winced. "I thought disappearing was mercy." "No," I said. "It was theft." Behind him, a curtain swayed slightly with the movement of air conditioning. For a moment, the faint shift of temperature touched my face. Cool, precise, impersonal. The world had tilted, and yet somehow it had landed exactly where it was always meant to. I turned to leave. "You wanted a new life," I said quietly. "You have it. Stay dead to mine." My shoes echoed against the tile floor as I walked away. The nurse met my eyes, uncertain, as though holding a secret she didn't consent to. Then his voice followed me, faint, cracked, pleading. "Wait!" I stopped, but I didn't turn. He took a shaky breath. "I need to see it." "What?" "The letter." He asked to see the letter. They packed the hall for his resurrection. The church dome glittered with artificial light, chandeliers straining to sanctify something long defiled. Beneath them, rows of pews overflowed with faces, curious, furious, trembling. Reporters jostled near the altar, their microphones blinking like red eyes of judgment. The broadcast notice had gone out that morning. Public hearing scheduled at St. Andrew's Hall. Subject, David Avery. I stood near the center aisle, the Bible on the podium replaced with a binder thick with documents. Evidence had taken the place of scripture. The sound in the hall wasn't silence. It was the murmur of breath restrained, expectation wound tight. Then a low hum broke through, feedback from the microphones. The sound swelled, cutting across whispers until even faith itself seemed to flinch. He entered through the side door. The crowd turned as one body, air shifting in its lungs. Emma walked behind him, her steps light but wary. She clutched a folder to her chest like an offering no one wanted to receive. He looked smaller than the myth they had made of him. Paler, thinner, stripped of divinity. The tremor in his left hand hadn't left him. It only hid behind the polished frame of composure. The arbiter, a diocesan official chosen for neutrality, raised a hand. "We are here under public record," he began. "The accused has chosen to speak." A hush swept over the hall. Every microphone light turned green. He cleared his throat. "I faked my death," he said. His voice cracked halfway through, caught between confession and self-defense. "I did it to protect the mission, the donations, the outreach programs. Everything was collapsing. I thought, if I became a martyr, the work would live." Gasps rippled. A woman in the back whispered, "Blasphemy." Another muttered, "Lies." I felt my pulse steady into something sharper than fear. Ruth, my ally, my compass, stood near the media table, arms crossed, eyes locked on him like a ledger balancing itself. I took a step forward. "And the money?" He turned, startled. "What money?" "The withdrawals," I said. $18,000 across 3 years. All traced to the church account marked under your name." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Collateral for the cause." "Collateral doesn't get buried," I said. "It gets stolen." The crowd stirred again. The microphones hissed. Somewhere in the back, someone began to clap once, then stopped. Emma lowered her folder, unfolding a single page. "He asked me to keep this," she said softly. "Said it was proof of why he had to disappear." The arbiter gestured. "Read it aloud." Her voice trembled, paper rustling. "Forgive the deception. The work must outlive the man. Do not tell her. She'll never understand sacrifice." I reached for the same paper, my hand brushing the corner. The ink had faded slightly, but the indentation of his handwriting pressed deep enough to wound the page. I lifted my own folder. And yet, here's what he wrote before that, an earlier draft he forgot to destroy. My throat tightened as I began to read. She'll break before she forgives. Let her think I died. It's cleaner that way. The crowd gasped again. No scripture could drown that sound. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. The arbiter leaned toward his microphone. Do you confirm this is your handwriting? It might be, he stammered. I don't recall. Recall? I snapped. You forged life itself. And now you forget the ink? For a brief second, the silence felt holy. Then the hall erupted. Shouts, sobs, voices overlapping like confession colliding with truth. The sound rolled through the dome, echoing off stained glass that seemed to glare back at all of us. The arbiter struck the podium once. Order! He turned to me. Do you wish to submit your closing statement? I nodded, though my chest ached. I only came for acknowledgement, I said, not forgiveness. He bowed slightly, then faced the man beside Emma. The board has prepared a document of repentance, he said. Your public admission, your restitution, one signature, and this hearing concludes. A clerk placed the paper before him. The pen glinted beneath the lights, thin, ordinary, capable of rewriting history once again. He stared at it, then at the crowd. For a long moment he didn't move. Finally, his hand trembled toward the page. The nib hovered. He refused to sign repentance. The camera blinked red, and truth found its pulse. Light poured through the glass window of the broadcast room, harsh and sterile, the kind that exposes more than it forgives. The crowd from the hall had followed here, cramming into the adjoining chapel, where screens hung like makeshift confessionals. Every seat was filled, every whisper recorded. He sat across from the microphone, back straight, lips trembling. The red recording light hovered between us like judgment incarnate. The air carried the faint heat of electrical hums, the kind of warmth that makes you aware of every breath you take. The host cleared his throat. You've asked for this confession to be broadcast live. Do you understand what that means? He nodded. Yes. Then speak clearly. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward Emma in the second row. She looked smaller than before, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched white. He exhaled, voice low. The funds weren't stolen. They were redirected. A rustle moved through the room. The microphones caught every sound, every gasp. I diverted donation money, he continued, to cover treatment for Emma's son. He was dying. The church's insurance denied the claim. His voice cracked. I made a choice, a sin for mercy. The host leaned forward. You faked your death for that? He nodded again, shame folding him in half. The board found out. I panicked. I thought if they believed I was gone, the investigation would stop. The mission could survive without me. A long silence followed. The broadcast delay blinked on the monitor. 8 seconds of grace before the world could hear his guilt. My turn came. The chief motioned for me to step forward. The mic's foam cover smelled faintly of dust and metal, oddly intimate, like speaking into the past itself. I looked into the camera lens. Its red glow burned steady, almost alive. You buried us all with lies, I said softly. You didn't fake your death for mercy. You did it for control, for the image of a man too pure to fail. He looked up, eyes glassy. I was trying to save them. No, I said. You were trying to save yourself from being seen. The camera light flickered once, then steadied again. The chief of police stood to my left, his notepad open, pen poised like a gavel. You've admitted to fraud, misrepresentation, and obstruction of investigation, he said. In accordance with Section 12, restitution orders will be filed immediately. The words carried like a verdict, flat, procedural, final. He flinched, but didn't argue. The weight of legality replaced faith. Paperwork had become divine punishment. I turned slightly toward the audience. Some stared in silence. Others wept. One man crossed himself. Emma rose, voice breaking. He saved my boy, she whispered. He shouldn't hang for that. I met her gaze. And what of the others he left to drown? Her silence said everything Mercy couldn't fix. The chief nodded to the technicians. "Keep the feed running," he ordered. "Transparency serves everyone." A reporter whispered near the aisle, "This will hit every local channel by dusk." The light from the camera brightened again, searing my eyes until the room dissolved into pure white glare. I could barely make out the shape of his face anymore, only the faint tremor in his jaw, the same one that had haunted every lie. "I thought I was doing right," he said, voice quivering through static. "I thought God would understand." "God doesn't sign ledgers," I murmured. He looked straight into the lens. "Then maybe she will." My chest tightened. For the first time, he said, "She." Not the church. Not Emma. Me. The chief closed the file. "We're done." As the cameras powered down, the silence returned, dense, almost physical. I stepped back from the podium, breath shallow, pulse erratic. The faint scent of warm dust lingered where the lights had burned too long. It felt like absolution's ghost, seen, not granted. He turned to me, eyes hollow yet pleading. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted to destroy you." "You didn't destroy me," I said. "You just taught me where truth hides." He nodded once, almost grateful. The crew began packing cables. The red light finally dimmed, its last glow dying across the camera lens. He stayed seated long after the recording ended, the Bible still open beside him, though he hadn't touched it once. The chief paused at the doorway, pen tapping against the file like a metronome of consequence. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than the hum of the empty room. "I don't ask for absolution," he said. "Only forgiveness." He asked forgiveness, not absolution. The rain judged us more fairly than the crowd. It fell in long silver threads, outside the courthouse, turning every umbrella into a fragile fortress. I stood beneath one, the fabric trembling as if it too understood what judgment cost. The air smelled of wet concrete and closure, clean, cold, and heavy with everything unsaid. Inside, the courtroom walls carried the scent of varnished wood, old dust, and damp coats. The benches were filled again, faces I had seen through every phase of my undoing, the skeptics, the mourners, the ones who whispered when I passed. This time, they were quiet. The judge entered with the sound of a single gavel strike, a dull, resonant knock that steadied the chaos. He adjusted his glasses and glanced over the file marked Case Reference A72C, the same label I'd seen stamped across my husband's false life. "The court finds sufficient evidence," he began, "to confirm willful fraud, falsified identity records, and misappropriation of charitable funds. Restitution will be ordered in the amount of $18,000. Additionally, community service and a public apology shall be issued within 30 days. The words rippled through the room like controlled thunder. $18,000. The number had circled me for years, on ledgers, bank slips, balance sheets. Now it finally belonged to consequence. I sat still, palms resting on the cool wooden bench. The texture beneath my fingertips felt like truth, rough in places, smooth in others, but real. For the first time, I didn't need to raise my voice. The law spoke for me. Across the aisle, he sat in silence. His hair, once carefully combed, was streaked with gray and rain. He avoided my eyes. His lawyer leaned close, murmuring instructions that sounded more like apologies than advice. Emma wasn't there. I had half expected her, the woman who once held my husband's secrets, but perhaps she'd found her own reckoning elsewhere. The clerk stood and called my name. "Do you wish to address the court?" I rose slowly. My voice, when it came, was steady but stripped bare. "I only have one statement," I said. "Truth is the only vow left." The judge nodded, neither smiling nor pitying. "Let the record show," he said softly, "that this statement will accompany the verdict in full." Pens moved, keys clicked. For the first time, the institution that had once silenced me now recorded my voice in ink. Outside the tall windows, the rain grew harder. Its rhythm became a drumbeat against the glass, steady, cleansing. The gallery began to stir, murmurs swelling into relief, maybe even respect. Ruth, my steadfast protector through every filing, every sleepless night, offered a faint nod from the back row. She didn't smile. She never did in victory. She simply folded her arms and breathed. He stood when the officers gestured. The gavel struck again, and the sound cut clean through the drizzle outside. He was led toward the exit, but halfway down the aisle he stopped. His eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second, not seeking mercy, not even acknowledgement. Just a man facing the echo of everything he'd lost by pretending to die. I looked down at the table where the court documents were stacked. Among them lay the evidence ledger, the signatures, the sealed judgment, all lined in neat, emotionless rows. Yet one envelope sat apart from the rest, its paper thicker, yellowed at the edges. The clerk cleared her throat. "Ma'am, there's one remaining item logged under your claim." She extended it toward me. The seal bore my husband's handwriting, familiar, firm, unchanged. For a moment, the courtroom faded, leaving only the sound of rain and the pulse in my wrist. I took it carefully, feeling the faint indentation of ink pressed by his hand years ago. The envelope was marked simply, "To be returned upon truth." I didn't open it. Not yet. Some answers don't need witnesses. The judge's voice echoed once more. "Court is adjourned." As I stepped outside, the rain softened into mist. It brushed across my skin like a benediction, washing away everything except the paper in my hand. The world felt lighter, not forgiven, but balanced. They handed me the original letter. I burned the duplicate, not the memory. The match flared in my hand, trembling just enough to betray that even peace demands a pulse. The paper caught slowly, the corner darkening before surrendering fully to flame. I watched it curl inward, as though trying to hide its own confession. Smoke rose in ribbons, weaving through the late dusk air that seeped through the open window. The scent of burning paper met the faint trace of old perfume still clinging to the curtains, a collision of endings. It was the smell of memory learning how to let go. The photograph beside the fire bowl stared back at me. His face, smiling, unknowing, reflected in the amber glow until the edges blurred. I didn't hate that face anymore. Hate was too heavy to carry into peace. The sound of footsteps broke the hush. Ruth stepped into the doorway, coat still wet from rain. She looked around the room, taking in the small fire, the scattered files, the empty teacup left on the sill. "So this is it," she said quietly. I nodded. "This is it." She came closer, her hand brushing a stack of envelopes I hadn't yet moved. "You kept the original safe?" "Yes," I said. "It's sealed, filed with the authorities. This one was the duplicate, the echo of a lie." She watched the flames. "It's strange," she murmured. "Justice rarely feels warm." "Maybe it isn't supposed to," I said. "Maybe warmth is the reward for surviving it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked faintly, and outside a car passed, tires hissing over wet pavement. Time, always moving, never asking permission. She turned toward me again. "Do you ever regret not stopping earlier? I thought about that. About the nights spent reading court documents under the yellow lamplight. About the letters, the tears, the silence that became a second language." "No," I said finally. "Stopping would have meant surrender. I only wanted truth, not revenge." Ruth smiled, small but real. "Then you found it." I reached for the last unburned fragment, a folded edge with part of his signature still visible. The ink shimmered faintly under the flame, stubborn, even in death. "He signed every lie like it was scripture," I said. Ruth looked toward the window. "And you rewrote the ending." The fire dimmed, its glow softening to embers. I stirred them gently, the ashes swirling like dust caught in low light. The scent changed. Less smoke now, more earth, as if the room exhaled relief. "I'll leave you to finish," she said, slipping her gloves back on. At the door, she paused. You did what most people only dream of. You outlasted him without becoming him." I didn't answer. Her footsteps faded down the hall, and the silence that followed was kind, not empty. I sat back, hands folded loosely, the warmth from the dying fire brushing against my palms. The walls around me seemed different now, lighter, unburdened. The mirror above the mantel caught my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't haunted anymore. She was simply human, allowed to exist without apology. I leaned forward, blew gently over the ashes. They shifted, settling into new shapes. 2 faint lines curved together, dark against pale wood. It took a moment for my eyes to recognize them, the initials he used to sign everything, looping and proud. Even in dust, he left a mark. I laughed softly, not out of bitterness, but understanding. Some ghosts don't vanish, they just learn new forms. I closed the window. The scent of ash lingered, not cruel, but sacred, like incense after a requiem. The fire's warmth touched my wrist one last time before fading completely. I whispered, "We're done now." The last ember dimmed, and in its wake, the ashes formed his initials. His seat stayed empty, but the choir sang my name. The church was fuller than it had been in months. Morning light poured through the stained glass, soft and colored, touching every bowed head with quiet grace. I sat in the 3rd row, hands folded in my lap, the polished pew still cool beneath my palms. His space beside me, once claimed, once sacred, was empty now, left open like a question that no longer demanded an answer. When the organ began, the first note rose like forgiveness trying to find its voice. It vibrated through the air, steady, unbroken. The sound wrapped around me, gentle yet insistent, until I felt my chest loosen. The choir's voices followed, familiar, fragile, human. The pastor stepped forward, clearing his throat. His robe brushed lightly against the pulpit. "Today," he said, "we read from a testimony that reminds us truth heals what silence once harmed." He lifted a folded sheet. I recognized it at once, the same statement I had given in court, now inked into the church bulletin. His voice trembled as he read aloud, "Truth is the only vow left." A murmur moved through the congregation, not of gossip this time, but of shared release. I could feel their eyes, some filled with sympathy, some with apology, but none with judgment. The sound of their breathing blended with the faint hum of the organ, and for the first time in years, it didn't suffocate me. Children walked the aisles, passing out new bulletins. Each one bore the heading, Community Renewal Fund. Under it, 2 names were printed in balanced columns, his and mine, separate but equal, past and present in quiet agreement. The boy who handed me mine smiled shyly. "They said you helped start this," he whispered. "I only told the truth," I replied. He grinned wider, unburdened by the history behind my words. The pastor's voice carried again. "Faith is not about perfection," he said. "It's about return." The light shifted then, sun breaking through the clouded morning, scattering reds and golds across the pews. It hit the old wooden rail, where wax from past candles had hardened like veins of memory. The warmth reached my hands, and I let it stay. I thought of the years I had spent in shadows, of closed rooms, of unanswered letters, of fear mistaken for loyalty. Every betrayal, every silence, every wound, they all sat beside me now, weightless. Ruth appeared in the back row, her coat still damp from rain, the same way she had looked the day she first stood beside me in the courthouse hallway. When our eyes met, she lifted her chin slightly, a signal of quiet pride. After the sermon, the pastor invited anyone who wished to speak. I shook my head. I didn't need words anymore. My silence no longer felt like submission. It felt like peace earned. The choir began again, voices rising higher, bolder. The hymn wasn't about redemption or punishment this time. It was about living, simply living, after truth. As they sang, I glanced toward his empty seat. Dust shimmered in the beam of sunlight that crossed it, a brief halo, then gone. I didn't resent that space. It had done its work. Some absences cleanse more than they wound. The service ended with applause that wasn't for me, but for what we had all survived together. People began to file out, shaking hands, sharing quiet smiles. The air smelled faintly of wax and polished oak, a scent that reminded me of home before the lies. I stayed seated as the crowd thinned. The last of the choir lingered, their laughter soft but steady, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The pastor approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You've given this place back its honesty," he said. "And in doing so, you gave it back to God." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe I gave a little of it back to myself, too." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "That's how faith survives." As he walked away, I looked down at the bulletin in my hands. The ink had smudged where my thumb pressed too long on the paper. I folded it gently, tracing the faint crease down the middle. Outside, the sunlight had grown warmer, spreading across the marble floor like mercy taking shape. Then a small hand tugged at my sleeve. I turned. A child stood there, barely 8, eyes wide with something between awe and innocence. He held out a crumpled piece of paper. "For you," he said softly. I unfolded it. The handwriting was uneven, childlike, but the words were clear. "Thank you for telling the truth." I felt my throat tighten, but no tears came. I didn't need them. The light through the stained glass found my face once more, and I understood. Some endings don't close, they simply breathe. A child handed me a folded page. This time, the handwriting was mine. The morning light came in slow and deliberate, spilling across the desk like it had been waiting for this day. Dust shimmered in the beam, tiny particles dancing in quiet celebration. The air was cool, the kind of stillness that only comes after every storm has finally run out of thunder. The Bible lay open in front of me, the same one that had once hidden his letter, the one that began my undoing. Its pages had yellowed at the edges, corners softened by time and tears. I had folded his words there once out of fear. Now I unfolded my own out of peace. The pen felt heavier than I remembered, not because of weight, but because of meaning. Every letter I wrote pressed through the paper, as if carving truth into something permanent. "You taught me silence is not faith," I wrote. The ink spread warm beneath my hand, a slow bloom that mirrored the light rising through the window. My handwriting shook at first, then steadied, the same way I had. The clock on the mantel ticked twice before I continued. "I forgive what I could not forget." The line came unforced, like breath I hadn't known I was holding. I paused, looking at the reflection in the glass cabinet across the room. The woman staring back wasn't the one who once searched for proof, or pleaded for truth, or counted years lost to betrayal. She looked older, yes, but in a way that felt earned. There was no anger left in her, only understanding. The scent of old paper and candle wax filled the room. Somewhere outside, a sparrow called. The world hadn't stopped for my sorrow, and that was a comfort now. It meant I could rejoin it. I placed the finished page inside the same fold where his letter had lived. The paper slid in easily, soft against the thin scripture. It was like placing memory inside memory, past and present lying side by side, but not fighting anymore. Ruth entered quietly. She didn't knock. She never needed to. "You're writing again," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "Not to him," I replied. "To myself." She smiled faintly. "That's the right address." We both laughed, softly. The kind of laugh that doesn't break silence, but warms it. She set a small cup of tea beside me, steam rising in gentle curls. The scent of it, lavender, faint and calming, met the smell of ink and paper. Life's small comforts finding each other again. "Will you keep it there?" she asked. "For now," I said. "It belongs beside the truth." Her hand rested on my shoulder for a moment, steady and real. Then she turned toward the window, eyes following the morning light. "You did what he never could," she said. "What's that?" "End something without destruction." The words stayed with me even after she left. I traced my fingers along the Bible's edge. Once, it had been a hiding place for guilt. Today, it was a resting place for peace. The difference was everything. The light shifted again, brighter now, glinting off the ink still drying on my page. For a heartbeat, it looked alive, letters shimmering like small flames. I whispered, "Let this be the last word." The house answered with quiet approval, a creak in the floorboards, the sigh of wind through the curtain, the hum of life moving forward. I closed the Bible slowly. The sound it made was soft but final, like the closing of a chapter that had taken years to write. I stood, the sunlight falling across my hands, and walked toward the window. Outside, the garden was waking, dew on the leaves, a single beam of gold stretching across the fence. I took one deep breath, the kind that tastes of beginning, and smiled. I closed the Bible and opened my life again.